This was a vampire who had just been resurrected. He had been hiding in a cellar for 145 years, disheveled and dressed in rags. Finally, he encountered a kind person. It turned out that while he had been asleep, the world had undergone massive changes, and it was now the 21st century. The man in front of him is not bad, but Harper is really hungry.
I'm sorry.
After changing into the man's clothes, Harper heard a sound from the pocket. He pulled out a metallic lump, frowned in disgust, and threw the phone to the ground. Upon entering the town, Harper was stunned by the progress of human society. The flood of new things overwhelmed him. Suddenly, Harper heard the call of his kind, and his gaze locked onto a woman. The woman later led Harper to a suburban house. Most of the vampires who had escaped from the tomb were hiding here. The leader was Madame Pearl, who had hypnotized the homeowner, Miss Gibbons, turning the house into a vampire headquarters. Anna, Madame Pearl's daughter, was the only vampire who kept up with the times, so she was the one to educate the others about the era's rapid advancements. Among these vampires was a glutton named Frederick, who frequently fed on Miss Gibbons' blood. Because Miss Gibbons was hypnotized, she didn't resist and was, in fact, very hospitable. Anna was rather displeased. Her mother had given orders that they were only to drink blood stolen from hospital blood bags. Madame Pearl's goal was to reintegrate into the town, so she restricted the other vampires from leaving. But Frederick, the leader of the revenge faction, wanted to slaughter all the humans in the town. Later, Madame Pearl and her daughter sought out Damon. The last time they met, Damon had humiliated them, and this time she was here to settle the score. Mrs. Pearl teleported in front of Damon. She pressed her two thumbs forcefully into Damon's eyes, and blood sprayed everywhere.
I have 400 years on you, little boy. I'll rip you from limb to limb without even blinking, and you know it. I'll be in touch.
In the vampire hideout, Frederick took advantage of Madame Pearl's absence to sneak out with his girlfriend, Beth Ann. Ignoring Harper's warnings, Frederick went to the local bar, where he mistook Elena for Catherine. It didn't take long for Frederick to realize he had the wrong person. Anyone who knew the name Catherine was no ordinary person, so Elena quietly informed Stefan, but by then, Frederick had disappeared. At that moment, Frederick was on the road, looking for prey. His favorite targets were single women. Jenna happened to pass by, and Frederick approached her, striking up a conversation and hypnotizing her. After a brief moment of silence, Jenna couldn't help but chuckle.
I'm sorry. That was a seriously lame pickup.
Frederick's first attempt ended in failure because Jenna had verbena hidden on her. Meanwhile, Jeremy had already grown suspicious of Anna, so he invited her to cook with him, then intentionally cut his palm.
That's just a cut. Will you hand me that towel?
Seeing Anna hesitating and reluctant to come closer, Jeremy pressed forward aggressively, forcing her to reveal her true form. Stimulated by the scent of blood, Anna's true nature was exposed, and with a flash, she pinned Jeremy against the wall. Jeremy, however, laughed instead of being angry. "Go ahead, drink." After much internal struggle, Anna greedily sucked on Jeremy's hand. At that moment, Aunt Jenna returned home. When Jeremy looked back, Anna had already vanished. At Stefan's invitation, Caroline and Matt visited the mansion, only to unexpectedly run into Damon on a date. As if that weren't awkward enough, the woman in Damon's arms turned out to be Matt's mother, Kelly. The scene was unbearably uncomfortable. Everyone shot Damon looks of disgust, but Damon remained completely unfazed. After the guests left, Stefan wanted to talk with his brother, but before he could, Frederick and Beth Ann burst in. The Salvatore brothers were famous in the vampire world. How could two low-level vamps think they could challenge them? Damon was still grappling with Frederick, while Stefan had already driven a wooden stake through Beth Ann's heart. Seeing the situation turn against him, Frederick fled. It was only then that the Salvatore brothers realized all the vampires sealed in the tomb had escaped. A battered Frederick returned to the headquarters, confessing his recklessness to Madame Pearl. Pearl simply poured him a cup of blood.
Next time you listen to me.
Later that night, Anna snuck into Jeremy's bedroom and questioned why he had exposed her. Wasn't it better to pretend to be ignorant?
If it was true, maybe it's true about Vicky.
Jeremy hadn't forgotten his ex-girlfriend, Vicky. Parts of the memories that had been erased were flooding back. He remembered Vicky had become a vampire, but didn't know she was already dead.
I want you to turn me.
As Stefan went out for his usual hunt of small animals, 3 vampires ambushed and captured him. When Stefan didn't return, his brother Damon sensed something was wrong. He rushed to the vampire hideout and discovered that Frederick was behind it. Stefan was in their hands. Damon was furious. But because a vampire must be invited by the homeowner to enter, the door might as well have been an impassable barrier. Stefan was Damon's one weakness, and now these vampires were about to pay the price. But Damon was outnumbered and overpowered, so Elena came up with an idea: vampire hunter Alaric. However, Damon and Alaric were once mortal enemies. The moment they saw each other, they were ready to fight. Fortunately, Elena intervened and mediated between them, and Alaric eventually agreed to help. Damon promised that in return, he would help Alaric find his wife. With that, they began to plan the rescue mission. Alaric entered the vampire hideout under the pretense of seeking shelter from the rain. To the vampires, it seemed like Alaric was walking right into the lion's den. Frederick assigned the task of luring the target to one of his lackeys. Little did they know, Alaric was the one who would strike first. He stabbed one of the vampires with a wooden stake, killing him, and then led Miss Gibbons to the back door. Damon was already in position, waiting for Miss Gibbons to invite him inside. But Miss Gibbons, brainwashed by Frederick, stubbornly refused to extend the invitation. The moment Miss Gibbons died, the house became ownerless, and Damon could naturally enter. Alaric was displeased by Damon's brutal methods, but Damon didn't care. He would do anything for his brother, as he was, after all, a demon. After completing the mission, Alaric returned to the car, only to discover that Elena was missing. When Frederick's lackey didn't return, he sent others to check on the situation. Damon, with deadly precision, ambushed and killed them, carving a bloody path down to the basement. Unexpectedly, Elena also followed him secretly. Together, they found a severely wounded Stefan. The ropes restraining Stefan had been soaked in verbena, so Damon couldn't touch them. Thankfully, Elena was there to help. Damon told them to leave first. He needed to stay behind to get revenge for his brother. Upstairs, Frederick realized something was wrong, and the vampires went on high alert. Damon moved like a grim reaper in the shadows, every strike fatal, but even he couldn't fight off all of them at once, especially since his opponents were all strong vampires. Luckily, Alaric returned just in time, and the vampire who was about to ambush Damon was shot dead by Alaric's custom air gun. The sight shook Damon to his core. Damon suggested they split up, but the truth was, he was worried Alaric might shoot him next. A vampire hunter's weapons were not to be underestimated. Meanwhile, Frederick caught up to the fleeing Elena and Stefan, stabbing Stefan multiple times with a wooden stake. Unexpectedly, Elena stabbed Frederick with a weapon laced with verbena. After being struck, Frederick collapsed to the ground, paralyzed. Stefan, however, was already on the verge of death. After a brutal battle, Damon and Alaric slaughtered all the vampires in the house. They were just about to leave when they stepped outside and found the place completely surrounded by vampires. The two had no choice but to retreat back into the house. Former enemies now stood side by side in combat. Suddenly, there was a loud roar outside the door. The real leader of this group of vampires, Madame Pearl, had returned. She looked around at the carnage, momentarily stunned by the sight of all the bodies. Damon immediately complained. "They started it, they bullied my brother first." Madame Pearl, knowing she was in the wrong, had no choice but to let Damon and Alaric leave. Meanwhile, Stefan was on the brink of death, and Frederick was slowly regaining consciousness. Desperate, Elena smeared her own blood on Stefan's lips. Sure enough, Stefan immediately revived, but he refused to drink human blood, insisting that Elena escape on her own. But Elena rolled up her sleeve, stubbornly offering her wrist for Stefan to bite. At last, Stefan gave in and he drank his lover's blood. Just then, Frederick charged at them, but in the nick of time, Stefan sprang to his feet. He seized the wooden stake and plunged it repeatedly into Frederick's chest with a frenzy. Elena saw a terrifying side of Stefan she had never witnessed before. As Stefan calmed down, he was left disoriented and confused. He had broken his vow. Afterward, Elena was still shaken. The Stefan she had always seen as gentle and composed suddenly seemed different, though Stefan tried to reassure her, saying everything would be fine. We all know that line usually marks the beginning of a nightmare. After the bloodbath, Damon and Alaric, oddly enough, became drinking buddies. Anna had fallen for Jeremy, pursuing him relentlessly, but Jeremy kept his distance, unable to let go of his ex-girlfriend, Vicky. However, when Jeremy learned that Anna was a vampire, he suddenly warmed up to her. because he wanted to become a vampire too. Though Anna was infatuated with Jeremy, she didn't agree right away. Instead, she asked why Jeremy wanted to become a vampire. Jeremy opened his mouth to speak but then stopped himself. How could Jeremy tell Anna that he only wanted to use her to become a vampire so he could reunite with his ex-girlfriend and spend eternity with her? Before he could say anything else, Anna vanished without a trace as Elena arrived. The next day, they agreed to meet at the bar. Jeremy, determined to become a vampire, began showering Anna with affection, even giving her the bracelet his sister had given him. That bracelet wasn't just any gift, it contained verbena, which could protect him from a vampire's hypnotic powers. Anna, of course, noticed something was off. If Jeremy took off the bracelet, she could hypnotize him and uncover his true motives. She could ask him, "Do you really love me? Why are you so eager to become a vampire?" And so on. But Anna didn't do it, even though she knew Jeremy's affection for her was driven by an ulterior motive. This girl, who had lived for hundreds of years but still had the heart of a young girl, was willing to trade her sincerity for Jeremy's love. Jeremy claimed he had figured out why he wanted to become a vampire. He woke up every day to the same routine. Life felt like a hollow, endless loop. But this reason didn't convince Anna. Typically, when vampires turned humans, it was either to create an ally, seek revenge, or out of love.
I'm sorry, but you don't fit any of those categories yet.
Just then, Anna's mother, Madame Pearl, arrived. Anna's expression changed, and she hurriedly moved away from Jeremy. It turned out their families had a deep-seated feud. Jeremy's ancestor, Jonathan, had been a vampire hunter. Not only had Jonathan betrayed Pearl's love 145 years ago, but he had also personally captured and sealed her away. Now, fate had played a cruel trick. Anna had fallen for Jonathan's descendant. When her mother asked about Jeremy's identity, Anna lied. The mother-daughter pair were preparing to steal blood from the hospital when Mayor Lockwood kindly warned them that the roads in town were flooded due to the rainstorm. Upon realizing the man in front of her was Mayor Lockwood, Madame Pearl seized the opportunity to befriend him in order to reintegrate into the town. As Pearl chatted with Mayor Lockwood, she noticed Jeremy exchanging glances with her daughter, so she asked the mayor about Jeremy's background. That's when she found out he was Jonathan's descendant. The families were sworn enemies, so Pearl forbade Anna from seeing Jeremy again. Meanwhile, the rain had loosened the soil, and Vicky's body was discovered. Hearing the news, Jeremy was devastated, tearing up all the reports about Vicky. He didn't even have a single picture of her. Seeing Jeremy so distraught, Anna finally understood Jeremy wanted to become a vampire to be with Vicky forever. How foolish she had been. The town hospital's blood bank had been robbed 5 times in 1 week. But that wasn't the most brazen thing the vampire had done. This vampire had infiltrated the town's Founders Council, gaining the trust of both Mayor Lockwood and Sheriff Forbes. But with the arrival of a certain man, the vampire's precarious situation was about to become even more dangerous. John was a bona fide vampire hunter. While the Founders Council basked in the illusion of peace, John stepped forward, listing the blood bank thefts and several missing persons cases to remind the council that vampires still lurked in the town. In the crowd, Vampire Damon's eyes darkened. He hurried back to the mansion to warn his brother. Since Stefan had broken his vow, he had taken to working out as a way to resist the temptation of human blood. Damon advised him, saying that strict self-control wasn't healthy. You can drink blood in moderation, as long as you're not hurting anyone. But Stefan sought absolute self-discipline. He wanted to overcome his instincts through sheer willpower, refusing to touch even a drop of blood.
Well, then you should just carry on making the rest of us vampires look bad.
Damon deliberately left half a glass of blood out, and Stefan's resolve wavered. He may have said no, but his body clearly had other ideas.
Almost forgot something. Oops.
Later, during a moment of intimacy with Elena, Stefan became unusually aggressive and controlling, showing signs that he was losing control. Stefan flew backwards, suppressing his thirst for blood with pain, a scene that terrified Elena. After Stefan left, Elena called Damon. Elena was deeply worried. Since Stefan had drunk human blood, it was as if he was turning into someone else. Damon cut straight to the heart of the matter. Human blood is like a key. What's behind the door is the real Stefan. The truth was, Stefan's good behavior and discipline were just a facade, hiding the repression and obsession underneath. Elena refused to believe it. Meanwhile, back at the vampire mansion, Stefan was unusually irritable and anxious. He craved blood but continued to suppress it. Today was the 150th anniversary of the founding of Mystic Falls, and the town was hosting a ball. The Salvatore brothers joined in on the festivities, but Stefan nearly lost control. When a guy made a rude comment to Elena, Stefan was no longer the gentleman. He had shifted from regal to ruthless, his presence overwhelming and explosive. Though Stefan was defending Elena, the scene only made her more worried. At the same time, Sheriff Forbes approached Damon. She had verified John's investigation and discovered that there were indeed still vampire remnants in the town. Little did she know, a vampire stood right before her. Irritated, Damon went to the rooftop alone, seething with hatred for John, who had just returned to town and was already causing trouble. At this time, John actually came to talk to Damon. It turned out John was Elena's uncle, and his return was to save the town from danger. During their conversation, John deliberately brought up the vampire hunts of 1864. When he mentioned that it was Damon who had released those vampires, Damon's brow furrowed. John had clearly figured out Damon's true identity. The two simply opened the window and spoke plainly.
And you're telling me this, why? I just thought we'd get the introductions out of the way.
But despite their smiles and casual conversation, they had each considered killing the other multiple times. As Damon took a few steps away, he stopped and glanced back. John still smiled at him. The next moment, Damon teleported behind him, snapping John's neck and tossing him off the roof. It was hard to say whether John's provocation was a calculated move or simply an act of foolishness. Damon's mood instantly lifted. So what if you're Elena's uncle? Did you really think I wouldn't kill you? Tyler actually hooked up with his best friend Matt's mother Kelly, and Matt happened to catch them in the act. During the scuffle between Tyler and Matt, Kelly was accidentally hurt. In the end, Mayor Lockwood stepped in to cover it all up. In public, he acted like a loving father, but behind closed doors, Mayor Lockwood was incredibly harsh on Tyler. Damon brought Stefan some good news and bad news. The bad news? Your girlfriend's uncle is a vampire hunter. The good news? I've already taken care of him. Stefan was stunned. This is all bad news. What if Elena finds out? Suddenly Stefan smelled blood. He noticed Kelly's forehead bleeding. Stefan's eyes were fixed on Kelly's forehead wound, and he couldn't help but touch it, just like a pervert. Realizing his slip, Stefan fled the party, struggling with the urge to lick the blood off his fingers. After a battle of wills, Stefan eventually lost to his instincts, greedily sucking the blood from his hand. The guy Stefan had humiliated earlier wanted revenge, but Stefan easily floored him with just one hand. Stefan's eyes were bloodshot as he slowly advanced toward the guy. Just then, Elena appeared, and Stefan vanished in the blink of an eye. The guy, having been compelled, forgot everything. Meanwhile, as the party wound down, Mayor Lockwood invited the town's most beloved citizen to ring the bell for tomorrow's celebration. Damon also squeezed into the crowd to join the fun.
John Gilbert, would you please join me up here?
But Damon's expression suddenly changed. He had snapped John's neck, and yet here John was, alive. John and Damon's gazes met, and everything was understood without a word. Damon sought out Alaric, knowing that Alaric had also come back from the dead before. At Damon's prompting, Alaric noticed that John's ring was identical to his own resurrection ring. After the party, Damon and Alaric stopped John and questioned him about the ring. It turned out both resurrection rings were from John's family. John had given his ring to Isabel, not realizing she had passed it on to Alaric. As for the ring John now wore, it had belonged to his late brother, who was also Elena's adoptive father. John not only knew all about the vampire brothers' past, but also knew about Catherine.
What do you want?
So many questions. It's a pleasure meeting you, Rick. I've heard so much about you.
John was clearly a man full of secrets. Meanwhile, when Elena returned home, she found Stefan hiding there, looking distressed and struggling to control his urges. He couldn't stand being without blood, and fearing he might hurt Elena, Stefan had come to say goodbye. But Elena answered Stefan with a kiss, saying, "I trust you, you won't hurt me." After returning to the mansion, Stefan also came to understand that constantly repressing his urges with obsession would only lead to extremes.
It's different this time, isn't it? The need is too strong. Of course it would be after all these years.
Damon had been right all along. He needed to drink blood in moderation, but human desires are like a boulder rolling down a mountain. Once it starts, it never stops.